Alright, hey everyone. Today we're talking about Jinrai kicks. So I'm going to put a graphic up showing the on-block frame data, but the TLDR is that the heavy is safe on block, and the medium light are punishable. The heavy and overhead follow-up are safe, and the low follow-up is -5. So the main mix-up you're going to deal with is probably going to be if you block the medium Jinrai. Ken can do one of three things, right? The low, the overhead, or nothing. Typically don't see the actual heavy follow-up done unless it's on hit, because it kind of whiffs on crouching and all that. One of the ways you can block this is to do a fuzzy guard from low to high, right? So you block low until the low follow-up would come out, and then block high. Right? So if you look at my inputs there, I'm gonna block low until as if the low would come out, and then I'm gonna block high after, right? So you see I blocked the low. If I do the overhead here, right, I fuzzy guard it, same timing, more or less, and instead if the Ken elects to do the overhead, then nothing will then I'll be able to block that high, right? And similarly, if I do nothing here, or if he does nothing, right, I'm gonna back up out of pressure, right? So this is an okay option, but you will eat the drive gauge damage, right? So right, I lose almost a whole brick, one whole bar of drive, right? So this is pretty heavy on the drive. Additionally, if the Ken notices you doing this, they may end up doing some sort of low option or sweep after the medium Jinrai into empty follow-up. Right? I could potentially get clipped as I'm trying to walk back if it's too close, right? So you have to be careful about that. Another option you could do is a parry. Right? Punish accordingly. If the Ken does the overhead, he's actually going to be plus, right? Or sorry, -3. So, oops. Right, so the computer is only going to parry for one frame here, but if you continue to parry, the frame rate doesn't change, right? So it'll be -3. The worst though is if he does the empty. Right, you get punish counter thrown. So parry is an okay option, but it does lose the empty follow-up, right? It loses pretty hard. You get a punish counter throw, and the overhead is just kind of blocked, right? -3. You do get the perfect parry though if it does the low, so that's actually really good for you. Another option you can do is to fuzzy jab, right? So after blocking the medium Jinrai, you time a jab to come out when the low would have hit you. This kind of works best if you have a good 4-frame normal. Ken does have a good 4-frame normal here. So what does that look like, right? So I'm going to have the Ken do a crouching light punch after a 3-frame delay, right? So the block count is 2 there, so we can do the crouching medium kick. So let's take a look at what happens here. Right, because of the block, the Ken's jab won't come out. Right, it's basically a fuzzy jab, so it's timed so that it will come out at the same time. So if the Ken ends up doing the low, you'll block it. If I do the overhead, I'll get punish counter jab. Right, so from here you can convert into whatever combo makes sense for you here. If the Ken spaces their crouching medium kick well into medium Jinrai, this could whiff. Right, something like that. You could mitigate this by pressing a longer range button. This is a pretty good option overall. I do think that it's something that you do need to lab out, unfortunately. Typically some sort of 4-frame, maybe even a 5-frame could work here. You could try something like a 5-frame or a 6-frame if you think that they're going to go for the overhead. They will block if they just do the nothing, but at least the pressure will end, right? If you don't have a good 4-frame normal, this is an option you can do, at least to stop the pressure. The downside here though is if you miss the timing, you'll get counter hit yourself, right? So if I change this and I delay this by instead of 2 frames or 3 frames, I'll go 1-frame delay here, like I didn't quite do it right, and then that converts into something for Ken there, right? Counter hit confirm. So you do have to lab this out and make sure that you have the timing down. The next thing here is you can go for a reversal, right? So a pretty universal option if you have a reversal that is 7 frames or better. Right, it's gonna blow through that. It's also going to blow through the overhead, right, and also blow through the empty, right. Punish count for all 3, right. The thing though is that the reversal has to be 7 frames or better, or you can use the derev, right. So you see that it's pretty universal, right. So if you have meter and want to stop anything that the Ken is going to do here, just blocking this, right, is going to be able to derev through, right. Ken is only -7 after the empty Jinrai. So if I have a character like Aki, for example, that has a slower reversal, right? So you see how the Ken's able to block, right? So your reversal has to be 7 frames or better in order for you to hit your, unless you have a read, right? So if the opponent ends up doing one of the follow-ups, then your reversal will blow through that, right? Right? It's going to blow through low invulnerability frames, right? So if you do have a read on the movement and you want to make the hard read there, you know, you can do that. But again, the more safe option for someone like Aki would be something like a D-Rev, right? So you're going to use 2 bars for that to end the pressure, basically. Next thing I want to cover is the light Jinrai. So we'll cover the other Jinrais really quickly. Light Jinrai, that's always minus 11. It's minus 11 on block, and there's always a very large gap. Always punish this. No matter what the actual follow-up is. For me, personally, I always end up using like a 5-framer. So for Ken, it's the stand light kick, which is kind of privileged, right? So we reach pretty far. The reason for that is because you get a little more leeway in terms of window to punish, right? If you block the light, you can always punish it, right? Again, I recommend using a 4 or 5 frame punish if you have one. It'll depend on your character, obviously, so experiment with that. So talk about heavy Jinrai. Heavy Jinrai is unfortunately always going to be a true block string, cancel into the light. Right, I can mash. Right, nothing will come out. So it's true block string there. And on the overhead, right, you can actually jab this, right? But if the Ken elects to do the empty follow-up here, he's actually only -2, right? So it's actually safe for him. So, right, take a turn back. If you hear Jinrai and you block it, I would suggest trying to mash jab and see what happens. Again, at best, you hit him out of the overhead. If he hits a true block string, nothing will come out, in which case you can stop mashing and go for a 5-frame punish. Or if he does nothing, you'll take a turn back, right? So if he has to go for some sort of parry option or something else to try to steal the turn back, but he is -2 there, right? And the spacing should allow you to get a jab. Now, of course, if any of these are spaced properly, it can be very difficult to get any sort of punish, so you do have to be careful about that. Now talking about the most common use of Jinrai in the sort of the neutral game, right? Is mostly going to be off of button, right? So button cancel in the Jinrai. So the most common I think you see is going to be something like this: crouch medium kick into medium, right? That's the most common that I see anyway. The other one that I see a lot is target combo into Jinrai, right? Another one is the stand heavy punch into Jinrai. And then less common is crouch medium punch into Jinrai. You don't see this very often. Usually that's on some sort of confirm, but it can happen, right? So I'll put a graphic up showing all of the gaps on block for everything in case you're interested in that. But basically, let's talk about counterplay now, right? So counterplay for this, if you're talking crouching medium kick, right, into Jinrai, right, or target combo to Jinrai. Both of these actually have a 1-frame gap in between. So if you look here, you can see right about here, there's a 1-frame window or a gap where the opponent can try to press something, they'll get frame trapped, right? So if I have the Ken try to mash something here, like a light punch, right? A counter hit, similarly for this. Right, so trying to mash against that is not going to be a good idea overall. And then again, if you're trying to mash against the Jinrai after you block it, is also typically not a good idea overall. So what can you do, right? So one of the things you can do is mash DI through here, right? So if I have Ken here is going to be doing a DI after 2 blocks, right? This is what not to do. Right? Counter DI comes out. Again, if I do this here into nothing, gonna cover. Although if I do the overhead though, you are going to get a DI in this, right? So this is actually not great. You can get counter DI'd out of 2 of the options. So what you actually need to be doing here is mashing DI through the couch medium kick, right? So this is actually kind of a read. Punish counter, right? And it's for all 3 follow-ups, right? So I can't do this with the medium follow-up. Punish counter. Overhead, obviously. Punish counter, right? So if the opponent is constantly doing crouching medium kick into Jinrai, you can mash DI after the crouching medium kick. As long as you DI into the first hit of the medium Jinrai, you get a guaranteed punish counter, right? So if you see an opponent doing that, that's an option you can do in that scenario. Another thing folks can do is something like a target combo, right? So out of this, right? And that's going to DI me every time, right? So remember, the target combo does have a gap there. So something you can do here is you can actually mash DI through Ken's target combo here. And if he does a string or some sort of cancel option as a gap, you'll DI through it. So if I do like a light fireball, for example, right, I'll get DI'd, right? If I do something like an OD fireball though, right, no gap there, You can't DI through that. But that said, you can mash DI until the OD fireball, right? So again, the reason it doesn't come out is because it's a true block string. So you can mash your DI until you see the fireball or some other cancel option, and then from there you can punish accordingly, right? So OD fireball obviously -2 on block, so you can't do it. But if there is a gap in there, most of the cancels will get blown up by DI, right? So something to consider doing in general against Kens that are doing target combo on block a lot. Another side effect of this is that the light Jinrai is also going to be safe, or you can also DI the light Jinrai. So some Kens will actually try to bait you by using a light Jinrai here, right? Because there's a gap, there's no gap anymore, so you can mash against this, right? Not going to work. But if I mash DI here and it doesn't come out right away, then I can actually do the DI until it doesn't come out, right? And then once I recognize that I'm not getting anything out of that, I can do my 5-frame punish here, 4-frame punish from here, right? So it's kind of an option select, right? Meaning that the Ken can't really do anything. If they hit you with that, you can just mash DI. If it doesn't come out right away, you know it's the light, so you can just press your 5-framer. If it does come out, it's the medium, which means you'll get a counter hit, right? So you do have to be careful, though. The counterplay here is that if the Ken has level 3, they could just cancel into super. So if you try to DI through this, he's going to blow you up with super, right? So take a look. Right? So you do have to be careful here. If you do want to try to go for DI, be careful of the Ken's meter. All of the lows are cancelled. Like the low is canceled into level 3 there, so if they go into the low or the overhead, they can cancel into level 3 if they have meter. If they see the DI coming, then you're going to eat a full super, right? So you got to be careful there. As far as the other options go, stand heavy punch and crouching medium punch don't have gaps, so you can't really DI through that. So we'll show what that looks like. Right, I can't really mash through the crouching medium punch. Similarly for stand heavy punch, there's no gap into the medium kick, right? So in this situation, we'll take a look at is a stand heavy punch or drive rush stand heavy punch into heavy Jinrai. This is actually a frame trap, so you do have to be careful here. Normally there's a large gap, right? So a large 6-frame gap here. But if I do a drive rush heavy punch into the heavy Jinrai, right, you see there's actually a 2-frame gap here, right? So if you decide to press there, you are getting a counter hit. You generally don't want to press anyway there since he's gonna be plus anyway. But you do have to be careful, right? So if you do want to try to reversal through that or whatever, that could be a thing. But typically you just want to try to block, right? So if you do this, right, you have to deal with the -2 situation. So since he said heavy Jinrai, you can mash your jab after that. And it will block, basically stop anything that Ken does, right? So again, if we have the Ken here do his light punch after 2 with no delay, right? Right, he's going to block everything because it's a true block string. If I go into the overhead, going to punish counter me there. And similarly, if I go into the empty, right, I'm just going to block, right? -2 situation. So if the Ken yells Jinrai again, I'm going to say mash jab, unless the Ken shows they can deal with it. So Jinrai here is actually especially brutal in burnout, right? So now the overhead is plus, right? It's +1 there. And everything else is safe now, right? -3, -1, right? So all of this stuff is actually safe, but the actual follow-ups are not real, right? So if we look at the gap here, I'm going to do a crouching medium kick into empty Jinrai, right? So something that typically baits at level 1s, right? Right, there's a very large gap, right? Even if I did that frame perfect, there's a very large gap between the the medium Jinrai and the next crouching medium kick. So typically what I would suggest to people is to not back up if Ken is doing this to you, right? Try to aggressively take a turn back with like with a jab or a crouching medium punch, something like that, right? So if we take a look at what that looks like, right? So you can try to take a turn back aggressively here. You do have to be careful if it's spaced out correctly, you may get space trapped. So, right, something like that. So you do have to be careful. Obviously, just because you're minus doesn't mean you're actually, or just because you're plus doesn't mean you're actually safe or whatever. So you do have to watch out for spacing. But that is an option you can do, right? You can try to take a turn back kind of aggressively here, especially if the Ken is too close. If the Ken is point blank, definitely take a turn back, right? But if the Ken is further away, able to space this correctly or properly, right, be able to actually counter hit that, right? So do have to be careful if the Ken is spacing the crouch medium kick well. Yeah, so that's Jinrai in a nutshell. I think I've covered a good amount of options you can do for counterplay against it, as well as some of the options that Ken can do once he adjusts to what you're doing against Jinrai. Just be aware that all Kens at all levels use this and abuse this tool, so having some options to get away from that is going to be useful. So thanks for watching.